One letter at a time. That's a good point, Sarah. So good. So we're I
I think
really
it is.
this Siman in general in the Shulchan Aruch is really going to deal with the limits of this idea that we've had of like of Shavei Pruta. If you guys remember correctly, back in the first Mishnah of Kiddushin, and this kind of assumption we've had this whole time has been that if you're doing Kinyan Kesef for Isha, that it requires something to be Shavei Pruta, right? The Kesef has to be Pruta, or it has to be whatever, or something equal to a Pruta. And so I think really that this Siman, and we'll start with Seif Aleph, which is on me, is really the breakdown of this a little bit, or maybe not the breakdown, the limits of it, so forth. So that's my, I guess I get to give the general introduction. And so I want to start, I put a source sheet in the chat. I don't know if people saw that.
Yeah,
but I want to actually, great. I want to look at a couple of things here. And maybe I'll read the first two sources and then I'll have other people read, but I just kind of want to kind of set the framework here. So just starting out, this is a Mishnah in Perek HaZahav in Bava Metzia. Perek HaZahav, if you ever learned it, I still don't understand what Hazav Konet Kesef Konet Zahav, or did I get that right? Whatever that means. But nonetheless, there's a nice Mishnah here. It says the following, right? Chamesh Prutotain, right? There's 5 cases about, like where pruta is a determining factor, let's say, or something like that. All right, hahoda'a, it's when you have like an admission, right? Shavei pruta, right? An admission in court that I did, I do owe you this, I did steal this, whatever. We're not going to worry about modeh at the moment. All right. Va'isha mikadeshet b'shavei pruta. That's the important thing for us here, right? V'haneneh b'shavei pruta mina hekdesh ma'al. And if you get some benefit from hekdesh for something that's shavei pruta, then you've committed ne'ilah. Right? And if you find something that's equal to a pruta as a lost object, you have to make an announcement about it. Right? That there's if somebody steals something equal to shavei pruta, and then they make an oath that that was actually theirs, you can trace them all the way. Madai, which will come back, not related to that, will come back in our Siman here. But all the way, it's a far off place, let's put it that way, Medea. So good. All right. But the main thing here is, right, Isha mitkadeshet b'shavei pruta. But I want to hold over our heads this question of, is that b'diavad or lechatchila language? All right. Like, what does that mean? And there's a reason I asked that. In other words, what if Reuven goes to Sarah, we have a Sarah, so Reuven goes to Leah, and he says, Haret mekudeshet li bet, tabat zo, and it's worth less than shavei pruta, and she says, okay, what if, and even if she knows, I think this is like a big thing of, are there possibilities where that will work or not? All right. And there's a reason.
Sorry, say that again. I'm sorry.
So in other words, a man says to a woman, Haret mekudeshet li, with this object, and the object isn't shavei pruta, and she knows that fact, that it's not shavei pruta, but she says,
in other words, can she like mevater on the pruta?
Exactly. Yeah. Are there cases? And it could be her, it could be, there might be other reasons why, so I want to just one more source before we get into the real crux of this. It's actually a sugya that won't show up in the Beit Yosef or any of the stuff we're seeing, but I found this sugya, and I think it's just kind of interesting, is a question of if there's like a call, like there's a rumor, or no one thing about somebody that they're married, going out, whether or not it's true, of like, can we be mevatel it? Can we say, like, no, the person can still get remarried, even though there's this rumor about them that they got married in such and such a manner? And this is in Masechet Gitin, right? From Gitin Pei Tet Amud Aleph. All right, I just want to read this one source because it gives us maybe a sense here. So there's somebody, there's a rumor goes out about them, a voice goes out about them. The idkadsha be'atzifa de tochla be'ene de be'shifi, right? They were married, whatever these things are, according to Rashi, some sort of like poorly cooked dates or something like that. They're like cheap food, right? At this place, at the ain of Be'shefi, wherever that is, right? Some spring, okay? Not so important at the moment. Shalcha Rav Idi bar Avin lakamei de Abaye, all right? And so Rav Idi, son of Avin, sends to Abaye, he says, Ki hai gavne mai, what's the deal in this case? Can we be mevatel the kol? Can we like ignore the fact that there's a rumor this person is married, right? That she's married. Amarle afiu lamande amar lo mevatlinan kala. Even someone who says that we can't, right, be mevatel a rumor like this. Beha mevatlinan kala. Here we can. Why? Mema armor, because people are going to say, right? I knew behu Rabbanan b'kiddusheha. V'lo have behu shave pruta. The rabbis took a look, they investigated this marriage, and they said, no, there wasn't a shave pruta. So people are going to say, like, they got married with these cheap dates. Okay. Clearly the reason, even though there's a rumor that this woman is married, clearly the rabbis nullified the marriage because a marriage that doesn't have a shave pruta is nullified. Now, this isn't like al pi hadin. This is al pi, like how people understand marriage, but I just want to kind of throw that out
This is
there.
actually very unusual because usually we think of what people will say as causing us to be machmir. And here we're saying, where people will say, it's a very interesting case because their misunderstandings are actually causing a kula, are allowing us to move out to the call, because they'll make an incorrect inference, which we don't mind them making.
Yes,
we're happy to them to make.
Exactly. So good. Yavni, you wanted to comment on that?
But it's because like it's the same. I'm trying to remember what the language is, but there's language of like the voice that
right. This is in
right.
some ways
so
it is.
It's like the same source that tells you that it was a marriage at all is the source that's telling you that it's a sketchy marriage.
It's like what the people understand. Yeah, potentially. But that's why I wouldn't say this is al pi hadin, that we would say this is like a rule, but like just to give us a sense, there is a known idea out there that a kedushin that's not shave pruta is not kedushin at all, even after it was done, right? Even if she accepted these dates and so on and so forth. So, okay, good. With all that, I want to start. And so then I want to actually just remind us, and just remind us a couple, we're not going to look at them inside just based on the time, but there's a debate in our Mishnah between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel of actually is it pruta or is it dinar? Dinar being more than pruta, that's Beit Shammai. But everyone seems to assume it's shave pruta. The halacha is Beit Hillel, and people remember this. This is towards the bottom of page 1 in the source sheet, right? We were talking about what about halipin, right? Halipin itnu befachot b'shave pruta ve'isha befachot b'shave pruta lo mekanya nafsha. All right, that there is this, that why can't we use like a kinyan halipin for marriage, because you can do it with less than shave pruta, with like kinyan sudar, for instance, right? And we say, and it's like the language here is amazing, for less than a shave pruta, a woman is not mekanya nafsha. She herself won't be accepting of, like she won't allow herself to be makne or niknet. All right, again,
right, we saw there was different gears of this that said that really what it means is it doesn't work.
Exactly. So that's the
not
question.
That it's her not that it's her personal preference not to be married with less than a pruta, but that it doesn't work.
Yeah. So exactly. And so it depends how you read what the gears of this Gemara is here, just to throw this out. And then one more thing, the Tosefta in Kiddushin, which we get quoted in our Gemara as well, right, talks about shtar. Right, this is the next source here on bottom of the page 1. It says, "V'shtar sarich lamar shtar sheyesh ba shave pruta." Ela afilu katav al cheres v'natan la al niyar pasul al niyar pasul v'natan la harezim mekudeshet. Right. So even if you find this like pottery shard or this really cheap piece of paper and you give it as a shtar, you give it to a woman, it's less than shavi pruta. For shtar that works, implying that it doesn't work for kinyan kesef. Right. That this is something different. And again, that seems to imply that kinyan kesef is limited to shave pruta or above. Okay, even maybe b'diavad. Yes, Sarah, go for it.
Well, I'm just wondering whether we can read the business about shtar as not telling you, and that's not implying that it doesn't work for kinyan kesef, but just trying to tell you that shtar is not kinyan kesef.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. Shtar is not kinyan kesef, and that's why it works even if it's less than shave pruta. But I think by implication, kesef doesn't work if it's less than shave pruta. By that,
I mean, maybe, or it just is saying like, we're doing, when you do it with shtar, don't get confused and think that what's going on is a document, like a physical object of value being transferred. No, it's a shtar. It's a different thing.
Yeah,
it doesn't tell you anything necessarily about
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that, and that strengthens my point, is that you could read it as being about, like I initially said, or you could read it as being about, actually it doesn't tell us what happens if you try to do kinyan kesef for less than shave pruta. By the way, I looked in Chosh and Mishpat. I was like really curious, like, does it have similar language for like buying karka? And it says shave pruta, and I was wondering, where did we learn it from? We learned it from kinyan isha, if I understood it correctly. And so that didn't help me at all. I was hoping that
Well, it does help you because it tells you that it's a universal principle that
good.
kinyan kesef requires a pruta. I mean, I understand it in the simplest of all terms, which is that it's just like in Shabbos, the hotza'ah has to be a certain quantity. Everything in Judaism has to be a certain quantity. And if you're talking about money, it's not money unless it's, a penny at least.
This is the midrash, right, about Dor HaMabul. I'm sure people know this, right? That the Dor HaMabul, like, what was their crime of Hamas? What was it they were doing? They were stealing stuff that was less than Shavei Pruta, right? And the whole thing is because you can get away with that. You don't have to, you get away without being tried in a court. And so they can, get away with stealing stuff without getting tried for it, which already is there, is like the sense of that Shavei, like less than Shavei Pruta is like not kesef. It might be asur, right, in terms of stealing, sort of gazela, but you can't. It's not real money at the end of the day.
It's not a shiur. So, you do not have a shiur.
Yeah, exactly. So with that, I want to start with the tour. I don't know if people have, if you have markings in your tour of for Seifim. I want to read Seif Aleph in the tour, and there's going to be two pieces. One about the Shavei Pruta, and then the second piece about do you need an estimate, which we're going to also deal with in a minute. So somebody read the first line in the tour. Let's see, Yavni, you're first on my screen, so you're going to get to read, and I'll stop you when it's time to stop.
All right. אין מקדשין בפחות משווה פרוטה, ומיהו אם קידשה בחפץ סתם, אין צריך לשום אותו. לשום אותו תחילה עם שווה פרוטה, אלא עם שווה פרוטה מקודשת.
Okay.
So,
you just explain to us.
Okay. You can't do kiddushin on less than a pruta, but you don't need to evaluate it and value it at more than a pruta, the object. If you're using an object ahead of time, even if you didn't do it ahead of time and after the fact you check and it's more than a shavei pruta, then the kiddushin are valid.
Good. And the language ein mekadshim befachot mishavei pruta lechatchila or b'diavad language?
Lechatchila.
Yeah, for sure. So good. Because of that, you get to read the Bach. Because if you answered incorrectly, someone else would read the Bach, but you answered correctly, so you get to read the Bach. So.
אין מקדשין בפחות משווה פרוטה, לשון זה אינו מלשון משנתנו דתנן בפרק הזהב, האישה מתקדשת בשווה פרוטה. וכן במשנה וברייתא פרק כמה דקידושין, לא תני אלא אינה מתקדשת בפחות משווה פרוטה. ורבינו דשינה הלשון נראה דטעמו כיוון דקיימה לן כשמואל דאפילו בפחות משווה פרוטה מתקדשת קידושי ספק. חיישינן שמה שווה פרוטה בוודאי. לכך, should I keep going or should I translate?
Yeah. You stop there and explain. Yeah.
So he points out that in the sources in the Mishnah and the Braita, the language is Haisha mitkadeshet b'shvei pruta, or Eina mitkadesh. She is not mikudeshet in less than a pruta, which is b'diavad language. And Great. He says probably the reason why the tool changed the language is because we hold by Shmuel, who says that even for an object less than a shvei pruta, we have kiddushin safek. Why do we have kiddushin safek? Because maybe this object that you use for kiddushin is worth more than a pruta somewhere far away.
Great. And by the way, somebody who's going to teach that piece in this Siman, I apologize, I just stepped on your feet a little bit, but yeah. Sarah, is that you? It is you. I'm sorry, Sarah. But yeah, so he already picks up that the language here is weird, and his explanation of it is that he's anticipating what's going to come later, is that maybe somewhere out there that's Shavei Pruta, and she could go sell it, in that place for Shavei Pruta. And I won't get into the details there because that is for Sarah to teach us and not for me. But keep going, Yavni.
But the safek, sorry, but I will step on your feet again.
Please, yes.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
But then it's in reinforcing the idea of pruta, right? Actually, it may sound like it's saying we don't need a pruta, but it's really reinforcing the idea of pruta, because it's saying
there needs
it's
to be
only
somewhere
if it's worth a pruta somewhere in the world out there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's our safek. We just don't know about that, but we're still circling around that same topic that we need the pruta.
Beautiful. Yeah. And so pruta still becomes the defining thing. Now, granted, you could have answered differently than the Bach, right? You could have answered that maybe there's some other case where less than shave pruta counts, but here that's not what he's saying. That's not the way the Bach wants to answer it. And I think you're right, because I think at the end of the day, the sources, even if they don't ever completely explicitly say it, although he seems to think they do, they're circling pruta the entire time, right? Pruta seems to be the cutoff point, even b'diavad. All right. So good. And keep going, Yavne. Let's finish up this Bach.
לכך כתב רבנו אין מקדשין להזהיר לכתחילה, לא יכניס עצמו בספק קידושין, דהמקדש צריך לברך ואי כספק ברכה, ספק ברכה לבטלה. And so we use this language of one doesn't do kiddushin with less than a pruta in order to warn you lechatchila from rather lest you like bring yourself into a case of safek kiddushin, and like what's the problem with safek kiddushin, because there's a bracha involved and like you don't want to do a bracha levatala.
Yeah.
Inami shema tekabel kiddushin מאחר הוא צריכה אינמי שמא תקבל קידושין מאחר וצריכה גט משניהם, אבל or another reason why you don't want to be in safek kiddushin is in case that there's another kiddushin and then you would need to get from both of them as opposed to only from the first one because the second one didn't count at all. אבל דיעבד מתקדשת אפילו בפחות משווה פרוטה כמו שהתבאר בסעיף ד'.
I think it's, I thought it was בסייעתא דשמיא.
בסייעתא דשמיא, sorry.
Might be סעיף ד' too, I'm not sure, but yeah, great. That's
קידשה בדבר שאינה שווה פרוטה ובסמוך. And we'll get into it more.
But good, that ending is actually like really important there too. Is like he actually like
he says you're actually kiddushin.
Potentially, yeah. So there might, or at least there might be cases, right, where that's possible. The case might be if it's shave pruta somewhere else, there could be all sorts of other, but it might be, it's a possibility. So good. So all that's the Bach, which I thought was just like was an important Bach there. And with that, so now we have the whole thing that the Bach says that's why we use lechatchila language in the tour. And with that, we're going to transition now in the next 12 minutes that I have to the question, this whole thing of the Shuma. Like, do you have to have an estimate already done? Do you have to know what this thing costs? Is it, like beforehand? In other words, if I come to Kiddushin and I come to do Kiddushin to somebody and I have an object, do I have to have already had an estimate that it was Shavei Pruta? Do I have to have an estimate of actually what was it worth in total? Or can I just assume it was? Can I have the Shuma done afterwards? Is it retroactively a marriage then? How does that work? All those questions kind of hang above us.
What if you did the Shuma afterward and it turned out not to be Shavei Pruta?
Beautiful. And so that's the big question. So here we go with that. If you guys on the document that I sent out, and we can share it again in the chat, on page 2, after that Bach that I stuck in there, there's a citation from the Bavli of Kiddushin starting with Zayin Amud Bet and goes to Chet Amud Aleph. All right. And let's see, Ruben, do you mind reading a Gemara cold? Maybe you know this Gemara. Maybe you know the first chapter of Kiddushin by heart. So maybe this is easy. So
yeah, I totally get that one, I think.
I'm sorry, where are you?
In the document, it says in the second page, it says Talmud Bavli Kiddushin Daf Zayin Amud Bet to Chet Amud Aleph.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Perfect.
All right, so let's
get the chat for anybody who wants to find it.
So great, and I'll put it in there again in case you joined late. There you go. All right, Ruben, take it away.
So how Gavra Dagdish Bishila? There was a man that was Mikadesh with a I guess a clothing made out of silk. So Rabba Amar Lo Tricha Shuma. Rabba said that you don't need to evaluate the object. Rav Yosef Amar Tricha Shuma. Rav Yosef said that you need to evaluate the object. If he said to her, well, be Mekadesh with me no matter what the value of this object is.
Well, I just want to, the way it's understood by at least Rashi is Bekoldu is like without saying anything about the value, right? So, okay, just like be Mekadesh to me.
With an unnamed value, not with a value less than a pruta.
Exactly, yeah. So he
just
doesn't say.
The value of the object is, right? It doesn't basically doesn't say anything about the value.
But he's not saying with something that's worth less than a pruta.
No, he's just saying
who can also mean like less than a pruta, and that's like Rashi is saying it's not that.
Yeah, exactly. So, in the case, for instance, of chametz eno mevatel b'chol shehu, right? Ramashehu, right, would be nothing. But here it's saying, you say harei mekudesh li b'shirai zo, zeh, actually, with this scarf, you're mekudesh. It doesn't say anything about the value. Okay. All right.
Well, we could look at Rashi really quick. Rashi said that mitkadeshet itkadeshti li bahem kemo shehen. So be mikadesh with that object the way it is. Like it doesn't necessarily like.
Exactly. It doesn't stipulate.
It says the object, just say like that's what it is, just take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So,
right. You could translate it also differently. An object as an object and not as its monetary value.
Oh, nice. That's a good point too. Yes.
Marry me with this object as this object and not as its whatever, because like, a friend of mine's father is in the furniture business. He said, used furniture is worth nothing. It's not worth anything.
Yeah.
Because you can't sell it but
in its state. Yeah.
In its state, but it is an object. It has value as an object.
No, but as you relate to Kiddushim, right, it has to be a Kiyant Kesef. So you have to attach some kind of monetary value to it. Right? The object by itself is useless unless there is some monetary value attached.
Well, it does say Kesef or Shaveh Kesef.
Yeah, so it's
Isha Kedesh Kesef or Shaveh Kesef. Maybe that's
right, but Shaveh Kesef is also associated with the idea of money.
No, but what's the difference if it's Kesef versus Shaveh Kesef? That's two different things. One is
Kesef is called hard cash, and Shaveh Kesef is the monetary value of the object.
Okay.
No, it's an object.
I take your point.
Yeah. So Sarah, what was your?
Okay, I have a crazy reading this Gemara, so you can tell me if you think it's too crazy. Or of the Rashi, right? Is when Rashi is saying Kamoshehu, is that just saying like the cloth as it is, not the cloth made into something?
Oh, interesting. It's not how I understand it. That's really interesting. Of like, in other words,
that's not how I read it the first time either.
This potential. I mean, I will tell you that one of the things we're going to find out is so much of how we understand this Gemara rests on why is this particular example just like it's from the field. In other words, we just happen to have an example, which is what it sounds like, or is there a reason why they chose this particular example? Because a garment in particular has some particular meaning, understanding of its value and so forth. Or maybe, as we'll see the Rambam's going to formulate it, is people just really like garments, or women really like garments in his world. And like, that's it. So there's all sorts of reasons, but it could also be that, come on, everyone knows what, everyone goes and checks out what the sales going on at Nordstrom's. I don't know if Nordstrom's is where people shop, and, and they just know, what things are worth, and so forth. So, all right. But Ruben, keep going, because I'm time limited here. So,
all right. So let's pick up from Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef Rav Yosef said that you need to evaluate the object. However, if he told her bekoldu, whatever that means, everybody agrees that it works. It's proper Kiddushim, and they're not fighting with one another. Everyone agreed that you don't need an assessment. However, now if he tells her the object, this scarf made out of silk, is worth 50 shekel or whatever, $50, and finds out that it's not worth 50, it's kricha shuma.
Halo shavu.
So in this case, it's not worth it, so therefore it's not a proper kiddushin.
Exactly. So where are they arguing? Kiplige. So
basically, the machloket is in case where he said it's worth 50 and actually it's worth 50. Rava said in this case, well, you don't need an evaluation. It is what it is. Like you said a certain value, it's worth the amount that you said it is. So that's a proper kiddushin. Because it's worth 50. Rav Yosef said, you need an evaluation. Why? Since she's not an expert at evaluating that object, she's not so mechdata, and therefore it's not proper kedushin, right? So I guess the machloket is on whether you need smichut adat or not. Rav Yosef said that you always need her to be so mechdata. And Rava says that, you know what, so long as it's worth what it's worth, what he said it's worth, then it works.
Exactly. So, and it works essentially, almost everyone's understanding it is, it works retroactively, right? That it's like, once they did it, it's done. So, good. But keep going, we're not done with this. There's an Ika de Amre, of course, right?
So there's a second version of this machloket, that Becholdu Nami Pliyeda. They're also in machloket as it relates to Becholdu. Rav Yosef Amar Shave Kesef Areu Kesef. Rav Yosef said that, so what's the machloket? Rav Yosef Amar Shave Kesef Areu Kesef. that the monetary value of something is like money itself. Ma kesef dekaitz, av shave kesef nami dekaitz. The same way that money has to be counted, it has to have a set value. So in this case, shave kesef, so it's something that's likely or closely resembling money, also has to have a set value.
Good, exactly. Right. If I hand you a 10-cent coin, it's 10 cents, right? So too, I have to know if the Baal hands the Isha a dress, right? She has to know that dress is equal to what it's worth ahead of time, right? That it's not a question of, and even if he says, to her, Harriet Mikersla be Shirai Zeh, it doesn't matter if he didn't say, and that is worth 50 zuz or whatever. She needs to know. That's the end of the day.
It has to be the price tag on, basically.
Good. So good. Read the next piece in the Gemara there. This is actually from a couple dapim later. It's like one line. It's from Tet Amud Aleph.
1 second.
If you don't have it, I can just read it out.
So Vilcheta Shira lo tzricha shuma. And the halacha is what? Is that as it relates to a scarf made out of silk, you don't need an evaluation. So specifically for this case, you don't need an evaluation, which seems to be saying that, however, in any other case, you might need an evaluation.
Exactly. Great. And so it's not so clear. And so good. So now we come to what the tour actually has to say about it, because I would like to, it would be nice to dive in. If you want, you can take a look. I put the Rambam on there and the Rashi and the Magid Mishnah and the Ran, all of whom have really interesting things to say about it. But let's see how the tour actually paskins this at the end of the day. Josh, you're next on my screen. So just in the interest of time, read again, starting right from Umihu Imkicha, even though Yavni already read this. Umihu Imkicha bechefetz stam.
מיהו אם קידשה בחפץ סתם, אין צריך לשום אותו תחילה אם שווה פרוטה, אלא אם שווה פרוטה מקודשת, ואפילו אם אמר לה, התקדשי לי בחפץ זה ששווה 50 זוז, וקידשה בו, ולא שמו אותו תחילה, אם נמצא אחר כך ששווה 50 זוז, מקודשת.
Great. Which opinion in the Gemara does this follow at the end? Or you explain it to us first, and then tell us which opinion it follows.
First. Okay, so if he just gives an object, it doesn't need to be evaluated. If it's a shaveh pruta.
Great.
Just if it really is, if objectively is shaveh pruta, she's mekudeshet.
Great.
Okay. If he says, however, 50 zuz.
Yeah, I just want to stop you. That's the kol dehu case, right? The kol dehu is the first, right? That's case one. Kol dehu doesn't need, as long as it eventually would have lived up to an evaluation, we're fine. But then keep going. Yeah. So, but if it's not the kol dehu case.
So if it's not, then only if they do the valuation and it is 50 zuz, then she's mekudeshet.
Good. Yeah. So this is, which is following, if I remember correctly, that's Rabba's opinion, not Rav Yosef, right? That even if he doesn't need a shuma at the beginning, meikara, even if he states how much it's worth, right? That it doesn't have to be evaluated initially, that you just accept it. All right. And all that, by the way, remember the halacha, we said b'shirai, that was in with a garment. Right? Does the tour so far say anything about what the object is?
No.
No. Great. Sounds like if you only read this in the tour, you'd think, great, that's it. It actually applies to all things. Then Shirai is just the example. However, when we get to Sif Bet, which I'm going to now pass the baton over for, that's when we get Rabbeinu Tam stepping in and saying, well, wait a second. Let's read the Gemara more closely. This might actually be only particular cases. So. And with that, I have to go. So that's hopefully good.
Thank you very much, Joel.
You're very welcome.
As you're going, I'll just say, I think that that we started off, tell me if this is right, that the beginning is talking about the lower limit and the end is talking about the upper limit. In other words, we're worried in the first part of the scene that it's too little money, maybe. And now we're worried that it's extra money, and her intention was to get married by an extra amount. and she maybe is in doubt whether she's getting that extra amount, or maybe she isn't getting that extra amount. Because it's implied from this that if it's not 50, if it's 40, even though that's much more than a pruta, she's not married.
Exactly. So, you have to know what it's worth. It has to be more than a pruta, and you actually have to know what it's worth potentially. Is the question. Like, it's not just like it has to be shave pruta.
No, I think that the man, whatever she is told it is the worth, has to be the worth.
Exactly.
According to Rav Yosef, she has to know the worth.
And according to Rabba, she has to either.
I think according to Rava, she can rely on his opinion. If he says it's 50, then she is samechat on what he says.
Exactly.
He said 50, so it's 50.
Yeah.
Of course, it has to really be 50.
So the question. I read it a bit differently, to be honest. Like I read at first that according to Rabba, you don't need samechat whatsoever.
I know that's what you said. I'm giving a slightly different take on
it. Yeah, it's not so clear.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's not clear. It could also be that when he says nothing, when he says stum, right, that the idea is, well, she knows what that evaluation is because it's a dress or whatever it may be. Or it could be that, no, all she needs to know is it's more than shave prut, and that's all she cares about at that point. And it's not so clear. Right? These are all the questions that are in the air at this point. So.
You're right. It's true.
So, all right.
So I think the difference would be, is it a business transaction or is it a business association, right? If it's a business association, then you need her to be there. But if it's a transaction, so long as you pay the price, that's what it is.
So, and with that, I hand the baton. All right, cool to everybody.
Thank you, Joel.
Of course.
So now we're up to Ruvain.
All right, hi everyone. This is going to be it's going to be a lot of fun. I think I have personally had a lot of fun learning about this part of the tour. I know we only have 20 or 30 minutes, so I'll try to go as quick as possible. I'll give you a little structure on how we're going to do things. We've already done the Gemara, which is perfect. We're going to start with the Tosfot on Tet Amud Aleph, Vilcheta, and once we do that, we're going to read the tour, and then after that, we're going to go into the Bet Yosef. If we have time, we'll do Shulchan Aruch afterwards. Maybe take a look at the Bayit Chadash and the Rambam. All right, so let's get started with the Tosfot on Tet Amud Aleph. Vilcheta shirai lo tzarich shuma. Is there any volunteers to read? If there isn't, I can read it myself. I really don't mind. All right, going once, going twice. All right. So Tosfot start with a question, right? So the first question that Tosfot asks is like, why does the Gemara need to come along and say that and be placed like according to Rava as opposed to Rav Yosef? Right? So we see in Baba Batra that in all cases, except for specific exceptions, the halacha is like Rava. So the Gemara didn't need to come along and basically state that the halacha is like Rava. Right? So there is some mefarshim that come along and say that, no, you know what? That rule only applies in the case of Baba Batra and nowhere else. So basically, Tosfot comes along and he said, look, that's not a good answer, because it seems like in the whole Shas, we always post like Chava. Whatever, so he goes on. Okay. Sorry. I'm just skipping ahead a little bit. So the second question that Tosfot asked, so basically the first question is the following. Why does the Gemara need to come along and say that we're posek like Chava as opposed to Rav Yosef? Right? It's pretty obvious. We know that for the Shas, whenever there's a machlokeh between Rabba and Rav Yosef, or Rabba and someone else, halacha is Rav. Right? The second question that Tosfot asked is the following. Miu kasha, amay lo kamar behedya halacha kevate de Rabba. Kedamar halacha kerav Yezer v'achata kerava.
Wait, say just which line are you on in the Tosfot?
Sorry, I'm on the line that starts at Mihu. So it's let's see.
On the right side of the thing is Mihu?
Yeah, on the right side of the thing it's Mihu.
Oh yeah, I see. Right in the middle, kind of.
Right, so Tosfot asks the second question. Mihu kasha, amay lo kamar behedya ilcheta kevate de Rabba. Kedamar halacha kerav Yezer v'kehalacha kerava. So the second question that Tosfot asks is the following. So why isn't the Gemara coming straight out, and saying, you know what, the halacha is like Rava? similarly how they say that a halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer or like Rava. So Amar Rav Nachman, Ve'omer Rabbeinu Tam, so Rabbeinu Tam comes to answer the first question. Ve'omer Rabbeinu Tam, De'ata le'ashmoinan de'davka shiraihu de'lo tzricha shuma. That it comes to teach us that specifically in the case of shirai, in the case of the self-card, we don't need evaluation. Because everyone kind of knows how much it's worth. And we're not so used to like making a mistake as it relates to their evaluation. But other things like precious stones and jewelry, that in a lot of cases, there are some of them that aren't good. And then we're kind of used to making a mistake as it relates to their valuation. We have a tendency to over-evaluate them. We need to evaluate. Right? So Rabbeinu Tam kind of like, how would I say that? It kind of redefined the machloket between Rabba and Rav Yosef. So for Rabbeinu Tam, everyone agrees that we need to have smichad dat. However, the dispute is really in the case of a cloth. It's really in the case of the silk cloth, right? According to Rabba, since she knows the value, she has somewhat of an idea how much it's worth. It's a proper kiddushin. But according to Rav Yosef, a piece of cloth or a piece of silk is like everything else. She needs to know the true value in order to be mekadesh. So Rabbeinu Tam just adds that in the case of precious stones, she's not fully aware of its value. She doesn't know how much it's worth. And in this case, both Rabba and Rav Yosef would agree that we need to do an evaluation, right?
Does this Perush appeal to you?
I mean, that's my pure, so.
What? No, I'm saying, does the Rabbeinu Tam, do you think Rabbeinu Tam makes sense?
Kind of makes sense so far.
I think so. I think it makes sense to say that we require smichat dat, because why? In other words, a woman needs to be fully, committed to what she's doing, and then so therefore by a silk scarf, she knows and she's able to be committed on the value of that.
Right. So the way I understood it is that the dispute for Rabbeinu Tam is on the limits of smichat dat, right? So for Rabbeinu Tam, up to a piece of cloth, we can assume that since she knows the values. Since she knows the values according to Rabbah, we don't need an evaluation. However, anything like of higher value, where there is room for significant mistake, everyone would agree that you need a proper evaluation. So if we were to say, so basically the way you answer the question is that if we were to say that the halacha is like Rabbah, we might have thought that we never need any kind of assessment, and therefore the Gemara comes and teaches us specifically about this case, about silk. Right? So Rabbeinu Tam adds, and for this reason, that's one of the reasons why usually under the chuppah, when we do kiddushin, we do it with a ring that doesn't have a precious stone. So the Tosfot asks another question, right? So in the second perek, we see that someone that adds a stone of its own, I don't know the case exactly, but I'm assuming that over there it said that it's a proper kiddushin. So the answer is Yesh Lomar Shesamotos, and we're talking about a case where they evaluated the stone. Or maybe we're talking about a stone that she has somewhat of an idea how much it's worth.
So according to this, if you would go to the store with the lady and with the kala and buy the ring with her, and she sees how much you paid for it, Well, I mean, the truth is that the store owner could be ripping you off. Really, you'd have to go get it. I don't know if you know. There's a Rappaport, evaluate. You can send a stone to be evaluated by a. Then it would be usable.
I'm Jewish. I never buy retail anyway. So, and there's another question. So, what about that man that was mekadesh with like a blue marble? And you see that Rav Chizda was nevertheless evaluating the blue stone for Shai Pruta. So the Tosfot answer, so this is different because it's a cheap stone. It's not like the rest of the stone. whatever it was, a stone used for the Bet HaMikdash. All right, a stone used for the Bet HaMikdash. So let's start V'yesh Mefarshim, which is another answer. So this is a second answer to the first question. The first question being, why do we need to be posek the halacha like Rava as opposed to Rabbi Yosef when we know that usually the halacha is posek like Rava? For this reason, we need to be posek like Rava over Rabbi Yosef. Mishum de Rabbi Yosef havi le'el kama rayot lidvarav. Rabbi Yosef, if we look on Daf Chet Amud Aleph, brings a lot of different explanation as to why he's right. And if the Gemara didn't bring that psak, we might have thought that in this particular case, it is an exception and Rabbi Yosef might be right. So Tosfot gives a second answer, but this one to the second question as to why the Gemara didn't say straight up that the halacha is like Rava. Yesh mefarshim mishum hachi lo ka'amar al cheta kerava. דלא תמה דהיינו רבה דיקה דאמרי בכל דיון, לא צריכה שומה. אבל אמר לה 50 ושווה 50 באה שומה. לפיכך פסק דבשום עניין לא באה שומה. So the reason why we didn't say that the halacha is like Rabba straightforwardly is because we might have thought that we're talking about the Rabba in the Ika d'Amri. And therefore it would have been complicated to understand. So in order to avoid any kind of confusion, the Gemara just said, you know what, in the case of a piece of silk, you never need any evaluation. And this answers also the second question we had, why the Gemara didn't say that the halacha is like Rava. Basically, it's to avoid confusion. So basically, to avoid confusion, the Gemara is not saying the halacha is like Rava, and it needs to say that it needs to bring it forward and say it in this case. I hope that made sense. If it was a bit convoluted, I could re-explain it again, but we now can move forward to the tour. All right, who wants to read? I'll just pick someone on the screen. Sarah, do you want to read?
Sure. Should I just start with Bet at the
Yeah.
beginning? Okay. וכתב רבינו תם, דווקא בחפץ ששמותו ידוע קצת כמו מלבושים, ואין רגילות לטעות בו כל כך, אבל אבנים טובות ומרגליות וכיוצא בהן, שאין בקיאים בשומתן, ופעמים טועים בהם הרבה, ואמר לה, הקדשי לי באבן ששווה 50 זוב, צריך שומה, דלא סמכה דעתה, ולכך נהגו העולם לקדש בטבעת שאין בה אבן. So that basically just summarizes what we just saw in the Tosfot, right? That Rabbeinu Tam is going to read it as being all about whether everybody agrees she needs to kind of agree to it, and it's just that there are certain kinds of things where it's obvious how much they're worth, and other kinds of things that you need to evaluate.
Right. So basically, like you said, it's a repetition of Tosfot, right? Rabbeinu Tam just redefined the machloket. It says everything above a piece of silk, where we can make like big mistake as it relates to evaluation, then we have to do like a proper assessment, because otherwise she's not somech b'ha, right? And that's also the reason why we're not mekadesh someone under chuppah with the diamond ring, because she's not somech b'ha.
When you say above, is it a question of like how much value it has, or is it just like classes of objects, how much knowledge the general population has about them?
That's a good question, actually. I think it would be a bit of both. That's a cheap answer, but I'm saying like, actually, I think it's more related to a class of object. Okay. Although silk is pretty fancy as well, so I don't know. It seems to be like, as it relates to silk, like people have more of a knowledge as opposed to like diamonds where people don't. However, I would say that nowadays it's kind of the opposite, because who knows the value of silk, as opposed to everyone has pretty much of an idea how much a diamond is worth.
Well, I'll tell you.
Where you bought it from?
Not really. I have a friend who's a diamond dealer in Belgium, and the whole thing they do is buy a diamond from another dealer, and it's a battle of wits. Who knows better what the price is between the dealers? And my friend will buy it. He'll try to convince the other guy that this diamond's worth $5,000 when he in his mind thinks it's worth $7,000. And then when he sells it, he tries to convince the guy it's worth $8,000. So even among dealers, there is a a lot of doubt about the value of a diamond. So it's a classic example. It's the most extreme example of something where the value is hard to determine, I would say. In other words,
would you define as a class of object or like general knowledge?
no, what I'm saying, no, I think I think that the class of object is those objects about which we have little knowledge, whether or not it's a valuable thing or a cheap thing. It's those things that the value of them is hard to determine. That would be problematic. And the diamond is like the paradigmatic example of something that's hard to determine, I think.
It seems like right, because it says, because Rabbeinu Tam says well, okay, this is the Torah summary, but the Rabbeinu Tam also has it himself. The like that you can make a ufa'amim to'im bahem harbe, right? Or he says like harbe yoter mishaviatan or something. That it's like this is the kind of thing for which there's a big margin of error. So in other words, if I don't understand the difference between the $25 scarf and the $30 scarf, that doesn't matter at all that much.
Right.
But like it matters whether the diamond is worth $5,000 or its cubic zirconium and is worth $5.
Right.
Which is like,
I think I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing. In other words, where there's a lack of knowledge, everybody has a lack of knowledge if you're not a professional in this subject matter. But the lack of knowledge is not so mashmuti. It's not so big if it's a cheaper object, and that's why Reuben's idea of cheaper does sort of make a little sense, because by cheaper objects, even if I'm totally off, it was worth $2, and I thought it was worth $1, so I was 100% off, But it's a small error in any case, in absolute terms.
So we're reframing the machloket in terms of like margin of error, right? If you have a big margin of error, like
I think the lack of knowledge causes a large margin of error. Exactly. It's another way. I think the lack of knowledge is just to say that she could be wrong, and there would be a big error. And there's two factors really. If it's a valuable object, and then even if there's a small lack of knowledge, there could be a large margin of error. And if it's a cheap object, you'd have to have it's very unlikely that you'd have enough of an error to be a significant error.
Right. So she's basically somechtat on like some kind of a range of value, as opposed to diamonds, where like her smichadat could be like totally way off.
I think we're worried that the woman will be oh, this guy must be so wealthy, and he gave me this 6-carat diamond, but turns out it was like, it was cubic zirconia. So she was tricked.
No, but we're not talking about tricking on purpose.
Okay, it was a diamond, but it was a bad diamond.
Harbe seems to be the word that's really important, because of course there'll be differences, everything as you mentioned, but harbe means that just
right.
Just not in the ballpark.
Right. The Torah says, "Pamim to'im behen harbe."
There's things we know. Yeah, harbe.
We don't hear you so well.
Because there's certain things we know with diamonds. We can weigh it. There's certain objects, but there's a glint or there's a flaw that's not really a flaw. But whatever, harbe is the deal.
All right, so that's the assessment from Rabbeinu Tam. Sarah, do you want to continue with the question from the Rosh?
Sure. V'chatav Adonai Avia Rosh Za, umihu lo breira li haitama lemana hagu ha'olam lahasir even mi'atabat delo ba'inan shuma ela kishamaskirim haschum. So the Rosh is like, well, I don't think this explanation really makes that much sense, because we don't actually really need a shuma, except in the case where you say like this thing is worth X amount. But nobody does that, right? No one says this amount. That's not a thing anyone would really do, so we don't need to worry about the amount of the we don't need to worry about this business of giving a ring that doesn't have a stone, because
does that fit to the Gemara?
Yeah, of course. So the Rosh is basically going back to the original machloket, where they say that bechol dehu, everyone agrees that we don't need an assessment, right? So
But by the
basically,
scarf, he didn't say there was a machloket, and the scarf he didn't say with this scarf that's worth $5.
Right.
And there is a machloket there.
No, it seems like it
I'm
depends which.
asking you because you're the grosh.
no, there's two things. When he brings forward the monetary value of the object, so then the machloket happens. However, if he says bechol dehu, then no matter what the price is, just accept the object as it is, everyone agrees that there is smichat dahat, and therefore we don't need an assessment. And that's the question of the Rosh, right? The question is asking that usually under the chuppah, the object is accepted bechol dehu. We don't remind anyone of the monetary value of the object, right?
So it's not, so wait, so let me rephrase that. So it's not that we don't mention the price. It's that we do actively say, marry me in a kol dehu of this object. In other words, is that what you're saying?
Right.
Like the rabbi a lot of times says, is this thing worth a pruta? When it's obviously worth a pruta, he said, maybe he's implying the woman should think that she's marrying on a pruta's worth of this thing. And therefore, if it turns out to be worth only, much less than she thought, she wasn't marrying on the whole value. She was just marrying on that one pruta in it.
The way I see it is that it's an assumed bechol dehu. The fact that we don't bring forward any monetary value under the chuppah, as it relates to the ring, means that the assumption of it is that you marry me bechol dehu.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the question of the Rosh, right? The question of the Rosh is, since we have a bechol dehu, and according to the original machloket, everyone agrees that we don't need an assessment, so Rabbeinu Tam's question, like Rabbeinu Tam's assessment, makes no sense. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah, could it be that the issue with the scarf is that there's a concern that it wouldn't be worth a pruta, or not?
I don't think so.
No,
I think so.
But can I just ask a question?
Yeah,
I
still
still think
like I'm not.
Yeah, it's okay. I still think there's a problem with the scarf, because it seems like when it says, I mean, this is what we were talking about with Joel, right? It depends how you read that vehilchata. But if you read it as vehilchata sharais lo tzriche shuma, in order to imply that other things do require it, then it seems like it should matter whether she can have some sense of what the value of the object is. And so even if he's not specifying the amount, so it's not some problem where like, oh, she thought it was worth X because that was made explicit, and then it turned out to not be. But whatever it is that she might think this object is worth is going to be wrong. So I don't know. It seems like it's hard to push off that line.
Right, but when we say
in
that
favor of this reading of the Rosh.
So that's the thing. When we say hilchata, the halacha is that a piece of silk does not need evaluation. Saying that it's because she knows the value is the interpretation of Rabbeinu Tam. However, the Rosh doesn't understand it like that. The Rosh might understand it like
right. But then how are you? Right. So I guess my question is really like, what does the Rosh do with that line? If not, it has to be about how much she owes or how much she understands, right? So you might say, oh, what this is really about is some other thing. It's some other concern with cloth. So
you have to say that you have to say that the silk case in the Gemara is not kol dehu. You have to say that, right? That it's not kol dehu, and that's why there's a machloket about it. And why is it not kol dehu?
No, the silk case could be kol dehu. There's no problem whatsoever.
If it would be kol dehu, there's no problem at all. Exactly. So it can't be a kol dehu because there's a machloket about it.
It could be a kol dehu. The scarf could be a kol dehu. A kol dehu could be anything. It could be a scarf, could be a ring, could be whatever it is.
But then why is there well, then maybe I misunderstood the Gemara.
So you're saying, so Rav Nachum, you're saying that the Gemara on Daf Zayin is implying, like, the only way we can read it is like Hahu Gavra Da'aktish B'Shirai brackets, and told her exactly how much it was worth. Close brackets.
Well, I wouldn't even say that.
It's just
no. I'm offering this as a possible interpretation. Not that he actually, not in brackets, but that keilu in brackets, because scarves are so clear what their value is. Everybody knows this is the $5 scarf, this is the $4 scarf, this is the $3 scarf, and they see them on the push cart on this corner every day. And so she sees that one, and she knows that it's worth $5. So she knows the exact amount, and it's as though he's saying it's this amount. No, and therefore it's not called to who, because if it's called to who, there'd be no. I'm just saying, according to the Rosh, I'm trying to. Maybe I
it just seems like kind of implausible because, like, I don't know, cloth seems like it. There seems like there are a lot of different kinds of cloth, and they have a lot of different kinds of values, and like.
Well, it's a
I just like have a problem with ideas, I guess.
Like the way I understood the Rosh is that when we say kol du, it doesn't matter whether she knows the value or not. It's not even relevant. She just accepts the kol du, the object as it is. And that's the difference between Rabbeinu Tam and the Rosh. Rabbeinu Tam said that you need to have smicha dat no matter what. She needs to know how much it's worth, and that's what her smicha dat is, right? The Rosh reinterpret the kol du saying that so long as she accepts the object, it's good enough. She doesn't need this kind of like monetary smicha dat.
But I think then it would be better for the Rosh if the Gemara said v'hilchata, like you don't need we don't need to be worried about the amount. Like it's hard for me to understand why shirai are a separate category that we need to tell you that they don't need a shuma if there's not some special quality that they have.
No, it's that they don't need a shuma even if you did specify the value.
I know, but that seems like it is implying some special feature about these particular objects, which seems to speak in the favor of the distinction made of Rabbeinu Tam.
That's the way Rabbeinu Tam understands it, that Shira is a special category. However, the way the Rosh understands it is that Shira is just a case that the Gemara brings forward, because that's the case that happened on the field. That's the question that was asked to the rabbis, right?
Right. No, I mean, I think that's how you end up having to read it.
And that's how we read it.
In other words, the scarf, if he would say nothing, then everybody would agree it works. But it must have been but if he said chamishim, which is what the Gemara says, then there's a machloket. And what the Rosh is saying is that when we get married with a ring, we don't say chamishim, and therefore it's like the kol dahu. Okay.
So for the Rosh, Shirai is
there's no argument between Rava and Rav Yosef.
Right. So for the Rosh, Shirai is not a specific category. It's just an example, right? And
sure. Can you read the Rosh as saying like, I agree with I agree with Rabbeinu Tam for the whole halachic argument, but I think that it specifically applies for the case where they're specifying the value, and therefore it's not a good anthropological explanation of where this minhag came from, because that's not the common case under the chuppah.
Sorry, can you say that again? I didn't get that.
I understood the Rosh is saying as like agreeing with Rabbeinu Tam in terms of the halacha, but like seeing Rabbeinu Tam is specifically applying, the whole argument is specifically applying to the case where you've had this kiddushin where he said like, marry me for this $50 scarf or $50 or whatever, $1,000 ring or whatever it is. And that's where the issue arises. And then Rabbeinu Tam's like anthropological explanation of where the minhag arose for not having a stone in the ring under the chuppah, the Rosh doesn't see that makes sense because that's not the common practice under the chuppah to declare the value.
So I didn't read it like that. I read it as the Rosh totally disagreeing with Rabbeinu Tam as it relates to the assessment. Not necessarily just
let me say one more thing. Tell me if this. Correct me if I want you guys to tell me if you agree with me, because I'm not sure about this. But the Hilchata, according to the Rosh, it would be a little bit better if the last line would be Hilchata Shirai. In other words, the scarves lo tzrichim shuma afilu if he said 50.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what Sarah's saying. Yeah, I agree. Like they never need shuma.
Yeah.
They never need shuma. That's because that's the only question that that makes sense. That's the only question we were actually debating, because that was the machloket between them when they said it was 50 or didn't say 50. But it's a little bit misleading when you just see shirai lo tzrichi shuma. You think it means where he didn't say anything.
Right. That's a bit hard just on the.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So it actually comes out that the Rosh does make a lot of sense now, because and Rabbeinu Tam seems to have missed this point that the whole that right, and the diamond, the halacha that you don't need shuma is where is talk. He's not talking about a case where you just gave it stam. Where Rabbeinu's case sort of misleads us into understanding that statement. In other words, Rabbeinu Tam puts us into this mindset that we're talking about where he didn't say anything and then a diamond ring is puzzle. But that's not what it would say. If you don't say anything, then a diamond ring should be fine. It's all the whole argument where we come up with this hilchata was only about where you said 50. And so when it said the scarf doesn't need shuma, it just meant where you said it was 50. Even then you don't need shuma.
And then you have to read the earlier Gemara that it says bechol dehu, as bechol dehu is like if you don't say anything, it counts as bechol dehu. Bechol dehu is not explicitly bechol dehu, it's implicitly bechol dehu.
Right.
It's stam.
Right, and that's what the Rosh is saying, right? There's almost an implicit bechol dehu under the chuppah since you don't mention the price. And as soon as you don't mention the price, it falls under the category of bechol dehu, and that's it. You don't need an evaluation. Okay.
And the real reason we don't marry with diamond rings is because not everybody can afford one. We don't want to embarrass anybody, perhaps.
So I know that we're slightly running out of time. I don't know how much time I have left, but we could take a look at the Bet Yosef, which explains in more details the machloket between the Rosh and Rabbeinu Tam.
Well, we really should stop really here.
We can stop here. If you guys want to take a look at the Bet Yosef, it's fascinating, the back and forth. It also brings in the Rambam. I'd encourage everyone to read it. And yeah, if you guys have any question about it, feel free to reach out.
Does he, right. Do you want to, is there anything in the, does the Shulchan Aruch Paskin just like this, Sif?
Let's take a look at the Shulchan Aruch.
That we do have time to look at one Sif in the Shulchan Aruch.
1 second, let me just get the right page. All right, the Shulchan Aruch on Lamed Aleph said the following. יש אומרים שאם קידשה בדברים שאין בקים בשומתם, ופעמים טועים בהם הרבה, כיוון אבנים טובות ומרגליות וכיוצא בהם, ואמר לה, התקדשתי לי באבן זו ששווה 50 זוז, צריך שומה.
שווה 50 זוז, look at that. He brings in the Rosh. In other words, that's the only, and he sort of throws in the Rosh on top of the Rabbeinu Tam. Right? He piles the Rosh on top of the Rabbeinu Tam. Because that Rabbeinu Tam is the one who talked about Evanim.
Right.
And then he just says, but that's only makes sense where you actually said the number.
Right. So if you set a value to it for something that you might make a mistake as it relates to its evaluation, you need, so like for example, like a precious stone or a diamond. So then in this case, yes, you need to do the evaluation because she's not so mechadat on your own, I guess, assessment of the value.
But why would you need the value? If you have a precious stone, even whether one person says it's worth 20 zuz and the other person says it's worth 70 zuz, you know it's worth more than a fruta. So why?
No, because
fruta
is the minimum. If a woman may say, I'm only going to marry somebody who can give me $50,000. That's it. I'm not marrying on a fruta. She doesn't have to marry on a fruta. She can say, I want $50,000. I have a loan. I need to pay my student debt.
We could also look at it that way, right? Maybe it's not even a precious stone; it's just a shiny rock, and it's worth less than a shapruta. I mean, I know that's not the case, but like, I mean, we could technically conceptualize it like that.
Right.
Anyway,
yeah,
so it brings another opinion. ויש מי שאומר שאפילו קידשה באבן סתם ולא אמר לה ששווה 50 זוז, צריכה שומה ולכך נהוג לקדש בטבעת שהם בארץ.
Oh, that's Rabbeinu Tam.
That's Sarah's opinion.
Why is it Sarah's? It's Rabbeinu Tam. No, we all agree that that's Rabbeinu Tam.
Oh no, I read Rabbeinu Tam as being all. I read Rabbeinu Tam with the Rosh as being all about the case where it's specified.
No. Oh, I see. Yeah, well, that's the nice way to read it. I would say that's a generous reading to Rabbeinu Tam, but this is like the simple mindset of the Rabbeinu Tam.
Right.
No, but it does sound like Rabbeinu Tam, right? Because like. It does sound like Rabbeinu Tam in a way, because Rabbeinu Tam seems to think that even if we don't say the price under the chuppah, you still can't use it because she's not going to be so mechadat. So
yeah, I think that's Rabbeinu Tam, the pashtut. I'm just saying that the first one is the way he said it. He actually sort of combined Rabbeinu Tam in the Rosh. Here now, read the Ramah.
All right. Hagav ve'im kitcha betabat sheyesh bo even o bestam tabat. ונמצא שנחושת, אף על פי שאין דרך לקדש בכך, חיישינן מקידושין. ואפילו אמרו העדים תחת החופה שהוא של זהב ונמצא נחושת, אף אגב דלעניין דינא נראית דלוהה ומקודשת, אפילו הכי יש להחמיר לעניין מעשה.
So why you would not be married?
Well, because she's not Samech Hadad whatsoever, right? He said one thing and it turns out it's the other thing. Right? He said you're Mekudesha with, I don't know, like $100, turned out that it's 50. I know that's a very different case, but like in idea, it's the same.
He gave her a ring. It turned out it was a gold-plated ring. It wasn't a solid gold ring. And even though the Eidim said it was gold, well, so that just led her to make a further mistake. She was somewhat that, but it's almost like a mechak ta'ut. I would say it's almost like a mechak ta'ut. It's a erroneous case. She thought it was something else. She was hopeful of getting a real ring.
He thought that the truth value of his claim. He said a lie. Right? It's not just about her accepting or not accepting or being cheated, but if he makes a statement of Kiddushin with a lie, it's not Kiddushin.
Right. Even if it's accidental lie.
Is it?
Right, but it's not a statement in this case, it's an Eidim, right? So like.
Yeah, I think it matters that it's the Eidim and not her. The problem is not that it's not that it's a nekach ta'ut and that she like there was a purchase that went wrong because she didn't understand. It's that the Eidim saw something, thought they saw one thing, but actually saw something else. And that's where it goes wrong.
No, I don't think so, because it says afilu, va'afilu amru Eidim. So even if the Eidim said nothing, it would also be the same din. He's just saying that
but the Eidim, it's just that the Eidim thought that they knew that it was Shavei Pruta, right?
Or the Eidim said nothing. Or the Eidim said nothing. But
and lo and behold, it wasn't. They were deceived.
Right, because the guy himself.
And that may end up deceiving her, but honestly, I think like once the Eidim think that one thing has happened, but it's not actually what happened.
The Eidim's job is really just to say that she accepted this object at that moment from this man.
But is it a proper edut though? Because like they're being made on the wrong thing.
I mean, I don't think the problem is because of the Eidim being not good Eidim, because then it would be the central point of what he's trying to say here. Here he's saying, even if the Eidim also made the mistake, the truth is I really don't understand why he adds this afilu amru.
You could read it that way. It's not a mekach ta'ut. It's not. We don't think that it's not kiddushin because of mekach ta'ut. We think that it's not kiddushin because the edim are not valid. They were made on the wrong thing. You could technically read it like that.
But that's not the point that he's trying to make. The point is that it was everybody in the world. She thought it, he thought it, the Eidim thought it, everybody thought it was zahav, the nimsa nechoshet, and it was turned out to be brass. So if it would be puzzle Eidim, then when he goes on to say, but the Inyan dina nira de lo havi mikudeshet afilu hachi yesh lachmir the Inyan maase. So he's saying you should require a get. So he's not saying the Eidim are totally puzzle, and we don't have a wedding here. We have I think it's a mechak ta'ut.
But what does Linyan maase mean? Like it's not proper kiddushim. However, there is a call that they got married, so therefore we require a get.
No, therefore you need a get. Therefore we can't just let her walk off and marry somebody else.
No, but the maase is that there isn't a proper kiddushim. However, there was an act of exchange, so people might think that there was kiddushim. So that's why we.
If this actually, the Inyan maase means if this would actually happen, we should be machmir.
So, like,
in other words, the Inyan dina, she's not married.
Right, tachlis it's not, right.
But we should pretend as though she is married and require a get. That's the way I understand it. I agree. I don't. You're saying it's not because the witnesses, and that should be have been brought in.
I was just looking at the Beit Shmuel.
Yeah.
So he says, "Afilu hachi yesh lachmir, aval gav imhu ta'a uta ena mekudeshet shani hacha dehu lo ta'a uta ela ha'edim."
Right, that's your point. That's what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Now I don't know where he's getting that from.
No, but okay,
I don't know where the,
right.
where the
So
Ramah is getting it from.
but the point is, she was still. In other words, she didn't have proper smicha dat. It's a kind
Because
of mechak
the
ta'ut.
only way she gets the information is from the Edim, but also if the Edim, it seems like it's still a problem if the Edim think that.
Now, it's
based
not
off-
just it's not just that he makes. So it's not just that he makes her error, even if the 80 make her error. But either way, she erred, and therefore it's not a proper kedushin because she has an erroneous opinion of what's going on here. She thinks that she's getting gold, and she's not. So he's saying it doesn't matter who caused the error in her mind. It could, it could be that midin mamanot. It's not called a mechak ta'ut because the Baal didn't trick her. Somebody else did. The agent, somebody else came along and said the apartment is a great apartment. The owner didn't say anything, but the agent said that. So the owner is not guilty of anything. So it may not be a mechak ta'ut. But it's still a ta'ut in her mind. And therefore she's not so much that.
But the Bechmal seems to be saying very differently, saying that if he's the one that makes the mistake, then there is no kiddushin whatsoever, and we don't even need it again. However, Shaniacha, like here, it's a different case because it's only the 18.
Right, because it would be a full mechak ta'ut if the Baal habayit, or if the husband did this. So here it's not really a mechak ta'ut, but still she doesn't have a smicha dat. Which Beit Shmuel? You're talking about Shmuel or Helkat Machokek?
Beit Shmuel. It's in mine. It's listed as Dalid, but it's the Dibur Machos Afilu Hachi Yesh Lachmer. But I think it is making. I think you're right that it's saying it's okay, even if the Edim are the ones who deceive her, that's still a problem.
Still a problem, right? Shani hacha do hulo tata ela edim, but nevertheless, and therefore it's you might have thought it's different, but it's not different. It's also in a mikudeshet.
But
the point is, it may not. That's exactly what I'm saying. It may not be qualify as a real mechak ta'ut, but it's still not samchat dat.
So according to the Rama, if he was the one making the mistake, would we need a get linya maseh?
Yeah,
I think that's what he's saying very clearly. What do you say? Say it again. If in which case?
If the case that the husband made the mistake, right?
Well, no. If the husband is doing the deceiving, then obviously.
Right, but I'm asking linya maseh whether we would need to get or not. Like, would it be different in that case?
Notice he just says, he doesn't say that the husband made a trick. He just says, v'nimsa nechoshet. Maybe the husband was in error himself. We're not talking about anybody trying to trick anybody. It just turned out that maybe he was tricked when he bought it, but she didn't have smicha dat.
Right.
Which chayshinan means we require a get. Yes, so in both cases, I mean, you're asking if the case is not said here, which is where he intentionally tricked her. And I think that probably he would not need a get. Here, but read the end.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that there's three cases really. One is where nobody tricked. One is where the Eidim sort of persuaded her. In those cases, there's not a real mechak ta'ut, but there's not a smicha dat.
Right. So what the Rama is saying is that even if there's a slight lack of smicha dat because of external events, such as the Eidim or otherwise, we still need a get.
But she's not mekudeshet really.
Oh, sorry, she's not mekudeshet. Sorry, she's not mekudeshet.
She's not mekudeshet at all.
Right.
But l'chumra, we need a get.
Right.
I read the end and let's finish up and take a break.
מכלומר גם נוהגים תחת החופה לשאול העדים אם אתה בת שווה פחותה, כדי שתדע Hakalash and Mekadesh Chag B'Shaveh Pruta. So in order to avoid this kind of mistake of her thinking that it's worth a certain amount or it's a certain material, we ask whether it's Shaveh Pruta or not, and that way she knows that she's Mekudeshet.
What does that mean, Rak Pruta? What do you think that means? Is it mean? There's two possibilities.
Does it mean denominator?
You need to have at least Sheva Pruta, that she should know that? Or is it that she should know that she's only marrying on a Sheva Pruta of this thing? You see what I mean?
Only on the condition that it be a Sheva Pruta, not that it be more.
Exactly. I think that's the point. In other words, when we say, this is a very important point, because everybody says this under the chuppah, and we need to know what it means. And I think what it means is, Kadei should take da kala she'ein mitkadsha rak b'sheva pruta shel hachefetz. In other words, of that item. In other words, only, even if it turns out to be nechoshet, she's still going to be married because of that. Because she was agreeing to get married for even if it turns out to be sheva pruta. So what if you would give her a diamond ring and it turned out to be cubic zirconia? Nobody knew, nobody was trying to trick her, but it turned out. So she'd still be married because we said to her, you're marrying, is this worth Sheva Pruta? And she said, and she's supposed to have understood by that she was getting married by the Pruta in this item, which there for sure is, even if it's cubic zirconia.
And I think that the Rama adds an extra layer of protection at the end. But sorry, I think you had a question.
This isn't a Nikki question, so we can skip over it if you want. But in that story, does that mean that she just takes the remaining part of the value, like n minus Shaveh Pruta,
as a gift,
as a matana, or does that mean there's no, it has to be seemed like you would think there would have to be a potentially separate Kenyan, or he could take it, he could take it back from her? Is that too weird?
That's a really good question.
You're right. The way it comes out, it's almost as though, well, I mean, yes, but he's not saying I'm giving you a Sheva Pruta and now go sell it and give me the difference. He's giving it all to her.
I mean, think about a timeshare, right?
But she's only mekudeshet on the time, right? If someone says to you, you are accepting only a Shaveh Pruta of this.
No, but that's not what's going on. That's not what's going on.
Right.
You're accepting this whole thing, and you're getting married on one Pruta's worth of it. That's the way I understand it.
Right, but technically speaking, he's only using the Shaveh Pruta. It's still a valid question, right? If the husband was to come back to her the day after and be like, "Yo, hand me out the rest of the
No, what do you mean? No,
does she have a right to it?
Of course she does. It's her gift. What do you mean? She could.
How do we know it's a gift? Just say that you make out a Shaveh Pruta, right? The only thing you need is that Shaveh Pruta of the ring. The rest is up for grabs.
If he would say to her, "I am giving you only a Shaveh Pruta of this ring, and the rest of it's still mine," that's one thing. But he's not. He's saying to her, "This ring is yours. It's your personal private property, not mine. But one Pruta of it, I'm using to get married to you."
I guess we go to the lowest common denominator to there's la Shaveh Pruta, so that way, we avoid this problem of smicha dat.
Exactly. She is somet her dat on the Shaveh Pruta, not on the whole value of the ring, because then we get into all kinds of sveiko. And therefore, actually, using a diamond ring would be perfectly permitted. Except that we don't do it because, I'm not sure that every Kala understands this point.
Right, and that's where the last part of the Rama becomes interesting. He said, we have a minhag to cover the face of the Kala, right? So they can't even see the ring, they can't even have a smicha that's not valid. They can't see anything anyway. They just let the Shaveh Pruta, they take it, they get married. Right? If her face wasn't covered and he was to present her with a diamond zircona, in her mind, she might be so that it's worth
Right. I've heard other explanations. I've heard explanations that we covered the face because Rachel and Leah or something, that they were hid in their face, but this is a different explanation. And according to this explanation, you should cover the face of the Kala should have her face covered actually under the chuppah, which a lot of times they cover it and then they raise it up. I don't know. But the point is they should be covered in some way under the chuppah according to this minhag.
I'm not sure that's what it's saying. I think
No?
it says the
Okay.
minhag is to cover the face, and therefore she can't make any kind of evaluation of the ring.
Exactly. No,
No,
exactly.
There's a
Is that
difference
saying we
for the minhag, and since she can't really see the ring anyway, then we don't rely on her evaluation at that moment.
No, I mean, because she covers her face, it's her saying, I will take anything. Anything that you give me is good enough for me, even if it's only a pruta. Because I'm not looking. Because if she came, let's take the opposite absurd scenario. She came with a diamond seller's, magnifying glass, and she started looking at the item. So that's exactly the opposite of what we're doing. We're saying she is blindly going into this, literally blindly. She's willing to get married for a pruta, and therefore we avoid this safek. Sarah, you have to say something.
No, I agree. I guess I agree. I just agree with Josh that I think that it's describing a custom and then saying that's why the Adim have to tell. That's why we need to ask the Adim to say, is this Shavei Pruta? Because she has to believe it. She has to hear it because she can't see anything. And then
also,
apparently,
go ahead.
I didn't see all of this inside, but the Tureza has an argument with the Rashba about when we call it let's say Yedei Safek Ra'ui Sheyachzor V'Yikadshena Afilu Be'ota Tabat. So her face is going to be covered, and so the way it seems like what the Rashba is saying, and I haven't looked at it more carefully than right now, is that you should do it again once she's got the veil off.
No. I think what he means is, you think that's what he means? I thought he meant if it turned out to be of Nechoshet. In other words,
well, I just was reading based on the fact that it's marked as a comment on Gam Noagin Li.
Yeah, I understand.
I mean, I don't know. I have to go look at it in the Beit Yosef to really figure it out. But
Gam Noagin. I understand why you're saying. Yeah, that you're saying maybe in every case we would do that. I don't think so. I think he's just saying,
or at least in a case where the Azim didn't say, right? Like if you didn't ask the Azim under the chuppah, is this worth Shavei Pruta? And she can't see, then maybe you have to do the whole rigmarole over again, because there was no way she knew.
No, I don't think that's what he's saying. But
no, I think there's also an element of expectation that's talked about. Like I don't remember exactly where, that she expects to have a ring made out of gold or silver, whatever it is, right? And if it's not, she still has that expectation in her mind.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that by the Masada Kedushin saying, is this Sheva Pruta? And the Adim saying yes, and her hearing that is implying to her, it should be implying to her, it should be letting her feel that really all she knows is that this thing is worth Sheva Pruta. And she's marrying it on that basis that it's worth Sheva Pruta. And not that it's gold and not that it's diamond. So whatever it is, as long as it's Sheva Pruta, then she's willing to get married. And that's her eagerness to get married. And that's really the reason why we tell the Adim to say this with Sheva Pruta, because to let her know that she's that there shouldn't be a thought that she's marrying, that she's requiring more than that.
But halacha l'maaseh, like, let's say a girl goes under the chuppah with the expectation she's getting a gold ring, right? Would the fact that the Adim said it's Shavei Pruta override a smichut da'at?
Seems like if you're the Rosh, yes.
Well, that's the first part of the Sima of the Sif. That's the first part of the Sif and the first part of the Ramah. That if there's a ta'ut in her dot, then it's no good. But hopefully, by saying you're marrying Sheva Pruta, that will avoid it. But if we didn't say that, and she was expecting gold and she got copper, then
the question are the
she needs to do it again. Then the Taz comes and says, do it again. And you could do it again even with the same ring. If she agrees, you tell her, actually it's copper, will you still marry me? And then she agrees, so then it's fine.
But she wasn't married in the first place, basically. The first Kiddushin were Nechal.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, nothing.
Yes.
There's a tshuva from the Basin of the Eilach Haredis of a situation, because you brought out, they go shopping together. So he goes shopping with her, and to find the right ring. And she looks the other way. If I remember the shoe correctly. And they had a it's our very precious ring. And but that's not the ring he gave her. He gives her under the chuppah. And then she's made aware of it. She cries under the chuppah, and she says, "Then I'll take it anyway." But at the moment that he said harayat, and she said yes, she was makabel a ring that was not the ring and not the value she thought she was getting.
But she
And
knew
it's
about
only
it beforehand.
afterwards she said, "I'll accept."
But she said, all right. So but then it should be fine because she was informed and she went through with it.
But only after the fact, is that?
Yeah, but I'm not sure she went through with it. In other words, because when she was makabel and she was makabel a ring, that was not the ring she thought she was supposed to be getting.
Oh, she was told after the fact? I thought she was told under the chuppah before she got it. Wait, we don't hear you so well, Rabbi Landis. Your connection is not good.
In other words, he says harayat mukudeshly. Can I forget the connection?
All right, let's take a break. We'll come back at it's really late. Let's come back at 10:32.
Yeah, sorry, that was a really fun.
Yeah, I sorry we took away from other people, perhaps. I guess we'll just do one more. We'll just do Josh. It makes the giving of the statement of the Eidim, that is word Pruta, much more significant. That they're actually getting the Kala to agree to marry, even if this is only worth a Pruta. And that's a big point that is not necessarily appreciated by most people at weddings, and it avoids any question of the woman not being so mechdat. Okay. Anyway, that's just I'm repeating myself. Josh, why don't you take us to Gimel?
Okay, pretty interesting, Seif. I think it starts, or seems to be about a very technical point of doing kiddushin on less than a sheveh pruta. But actually opens up the whole area that we've been touching, I think, since the beginning of safek kiddushin, and it plays out a little bit what safek kiddushin actually means and why. So we can explore. And my style is I usually start with a Shulchan Aruch and work backwards. So if you'll join me on that journey, you can either open up or I can share my screen. And maybe someone wants to read? Sarah?
I just read so we could get someone else to do it.
I don't know. Masha, you there?
Sure. With the Shulchan Aruch?
Yeah, in Gimel.
Kidesh be'ochel או בכלי או כיוצא בו, is that where we are? ששווה פחות משווה פרוטה, הרי זו מקודשת מספק. שם הדבר זה שווה פרוטה במקום אחר. So stop there or go through the whole thing.
Okay, so stop there and translate.
Okay, so if he married her with some kind of food or with a kli, a utensil, a vessel, or something like that, that is valued at less than the value of a pruta, she is betrothed on the basis of the possibility, a safek, that it is possible that this thing is in fact worth a pruta, in some other place. ויש אומרים שאם קידש ותבשילו בירק שאינו מתקיים וכיוצא בהם, אם לא היה שווה פרוטה באותו מקום, אינה מקודשת כלל. שהרי דבר זה אינו מגיע למקום אחר עד שיפסיד ויאבד ולא יהיה שווה פרוטה. And there are those that say that if he married her with some cooked food or vegetable that doesn't stay good, that is, that will devalue or will rot or will become inedible, I guess, or other things that are like them, if it was not worth a pruta in that place, apparently where the kiddushin take place, then she is not mikudeshet at all, since this thing will not arrive at a place where it can be appraised until it depreciates in value or will be completely devalued and won't be worth a pruta when it arrives there.
Very nice. Okay. So we have a din. It's adding something new. It's saying even if it's pachot mishaveh pruta, there's still a form of kiddushin. It's mekudeshet misafek. Gives us a reason. Right? Maybe it's worth more than pruta in a different place. And the question is whether that's an absolute. Right? Is she always mekudeshet misafek if it's less than a pruta, or does it have to be practical? Does this have to be real? Right? Does there have to be another place where this thing is more than shaveh pruta? And the second half of this, the Yesh Omrim kind of plays that out and says, no, there's some cases where it can't be more than shaveh pruta anywhere else, because practically you can't do that. You can't transport it to a place where it's more than shaveh pruta. Okay, so that's kind of the framework we're going to be working within. Rabbi Nachman says that it's a big skula to study the Shulchan Aruch with Be'er HaGolah. Okay, so I don't know what that means, but let's do it. I have a suspicion why he says that. To connect to the flow of halacha and not see things in as static. But let's look at Vav Zayin and Chet. That's what's being quoted in our Seif. So the beginning, the whole thing about Ochel Pachot Mishaveh Pruta, Vav, is Meimah de Shmuel, Sham Daf Yud Bet. So that's in Kiddushin Daf Yud Bet Amud Aleph. Chayshinan Shema Shaveh Pruta b'Madai b'Haskamat HaPoskim. Okay, so we know that we're going to have to look at a bit of Gemara in order to get the background for this, and we know we're going to be paskening like Shmuel, so there's obviously a machloket when we get to the Gemara. Zayin is also Sham Gemara, and Chet, that's on the Yesh Omrim. So who's that Yesh Omrim? Rambam בפרק ד' בהלכות אישות, וכתב הרב מגיד בשם הרמב"ן שהדברים נראים ומתקבלים ויש חולקים. Okay, so you have this Rambam and his camp of followers, the Magid and Ramban. וכך כתב הטור בשם ריב ואביב הראש, לעולם הווה קידושי ספק. So we have another opinion, just the Tur, the Ri and the Rosh, that there's always Kiddushei Safek. Okay, even in this practical case where the food would rot before getting anywhere else with different value, it's still Kiddushei Safek. So that's kind of the introduction to what we're going to be reading. Let's go to the Gemara. If you have it, it's Yud Bet Amud Aleph at the bottom. You can read. Gary, are you there?
Rabbeinu Gershom?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Is that where the red line is?
Yeah, Amar Shmuel.
Okay, one sec. Just reformat the screen a bit. Amar Shmuel, Kidsha Tamra, Philo Omed Kur. Sorry, I have to move this thing. Omed Kur Tamarim Bedinar Mikudeshet. Chashinan Shema Shave Prata. Shema Shave Pruta Bebadai.
Okay, translate that.
So Shmuel says, if she undertook Kiddushin with the value of a date, afilu omed kur, I'm not entirely sure what omed kur means in this case, but certainly maybe
like if like a kilogram of dates, right?
Okay, omed kur tamarim.
What the dinar?
Bedinar, she is mekudeshet. We are concerned, Shema Shaveh Pruta, we're concerned about the value, whether or not this kur of tamarim is Shaveh Pruta exactly.
No.
No,
the whole kur.
A kur is like a big amount. So even if dates are really cheap, you can buy a whole kur of dates for just 1 dinar. So each date is less than a Shaveh Pruta. He says Mekudeshet because we're worried that maybe in Persia the dates.
Oh, Bamadai, sorry. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Even if Iraqi dates are cheap, Persian dates might be expensive. But okay. But then the Gemara jumps up and says, "What are you talking about? What's this pachot mishaveh pruta? How can we say mikudeshet?"
But notice this. Wait. It says strange lashon because it says mikudeshet, and then it says because of a chashash. That's kind of weird. In other words, the mikudeshet is not an absolute statement. It's really just a l'chumra because it's based on a chashash.
Right. I mean, I think that gets into, I know like a lot of the sources end up talking about this as like a gzera, right? Which is like, it's different than like, oh, like mikudeshet derabanan because of something about kind of like the essence of the act, so much as like, we're worried about X, Y, Z. And so it's like a gzera that essentially you need to get.
Right.
It's interesting. It kind of, the phrasing changes from Kiddushei Safek to Kiddushei Derabanan at some point. But this one doesn't say it. You could read it. You could say, okay, it's Safek Doraita, so she's Mekudeshet.
Right.
Right? If it's a binary of either Mekudeshet or not, so Shmuel is saying Mekudeshet because it's a Safek Doraita.
Right. So Safek Doraita l'chumra derabanan. That's by the way an interesting sugya whether Safek Doraita l'chumra is a din doraita or derabanan. But yeah, fine. So, but you're right. I mean, it's not really much of a nafkamina. But I'm just pointing it out that it's an interesting language of she's mikudeshet based on a suffix, and so it's really suffix mikudeshet. But of course, suffix mikudeshet is essentially mikudeshet because we need a get, and we're gonna make them do it again. I suppose. I
think that's what the Gemara does immediately. It's kind of shocked by Shmuel's language of mikudeshet, and it says v'ha'anan. And we know this in the Mishnah. It's a Beit Hillel. Lakashya, haba kiddushay vadai, haba kiddushay safek. So what Beit Hillel was talking about is kiddushay vadai. Kiddushay vadai is with shaveh puta. And what Shmuel is talking about, when he says mikudeshet, he means kiddushay safek. Safek mikudeshet. Okay, we still don't really know what Safek Mekudeshet means, and that's what the Rishonim are going to bring in to the discussion. But just to have a bit more background, there's another opinion. Just not everyone holds like Shmuel. Okay, so if you skip down a few lines to where I'm marked with green, Hahu Gavra the Aktish be Avna de Kuchla.
Maybe I'll read this. Okay, so this guy does kiddushin with like a blue stone or like a chip of marble. Okay, so like a very worthless stone. Yativ Rav Chisda v'kam sha'er le i'it be'shaveh pruta in v'ilala. So Rav Chisda sat down and tried to figure out how much this piece of stone is worth, and he said if it's worth a pruta, then she's mekudeshet, and if not, not. What's the problem? V'ileit be'shaveh pruta lo. Is she not mekudeshet even if it doesn't have shaveh pruta? V'hamar Shmuel chashinan. We have the statement of Shmuel that says chashinan. So even if it's less than the shaveh pruta, she should be mekudeshet. Rav Chisda la savar le de Shmuel. Rav Chisda doesn't agree. Okay, so we have this other opinion, and that leads to a whole roller coaster of back and forth on what Rav Chisda was doing, why Rav Chisda said what he says. Tosfot says he was in a practical case where the brother of the guy who did kiddushin came along and did kiddushin with a shaveh pruta, and then he had to decide if the first one was shaveh pruta or not. He had to free this one from this predicament. But there's a back and forth between Shmuel and Rav Chisda. And
this is an expansion because this is a very big expansion because I would have just said the first case is fruits and things that have various values at various locations. Strawberries in the summertime are, various fruits are worth different values at different times of the year, depending on whether it's harvest time or in general what location you're in. But maybe a piece of stone is, pretty worthless everywhere. It's not like in certain places they don't have stones, so it's an expansion to say that it's almost as though we're saying on every item we have a doubt about whether it's worth more than a pruta somewhere. I'd say that's an expansion from the first case.
It's maybe adding to the toolbox of rabbis who need to annul marriages.
Well, wasn't it the opposite? Because we're saying more and more things are potentially married.
Right, unless you don't agree with Shmuel, and that's going to be what all the Rishonim, how you line up the Rishonim is if they agree with Shmuel or Rav Chisda, or Abaye v'Rava. That's a different issue. I'm taking one more piece from this debate on the next page. Amre le Rabbanan Rav Chisda. Amai ha'ika sahade be'idit de'yadei de'bahu yom hava be'shaveh pruta. So still going back to this piece of stone, the Rabbanan said to Rav Chisda, maybe there's these witnesses in a place called Idit or Rit, depends on your manuscript. And in Idit, these witnesses know how much that piece of marble was worth on that day. So they can tell you. So maybe she's mekudeshet on the basis of these potential witnesses. And he says to them, Hashta miha lalitnehu kaman. But now these witnesses are not in front of me. So I'm not going to declare her married on the basis of these witnesses. Okay? And that's also something that the poskim are going to line up according to whether witnesses need to be potential or they need to be actual. Okay, whether witnesses really need to know or whether they could know. And the Tosfot here, I'm aware of time, so I think I'm not going to read the Tosfot here, but I'm going to read it in the tour. Okay. Okay, let's see how we do this. Okay, let's read it. It's a bit like Dalet is kind of mixed into Gimel here, and the Beit Yosef doesn't like the way the two arranged it, so that's why he rearranges the text, and that's why we have the Seifim arranged this way. So I'll read here. קידשה בדבר שאינו שווה פרוטה, הווה ספק קידושין, וצריכה גט מספק להתירה לעלמא. ואם רוצה לקיימה, צריכה קידושין אחרים. So now the Torah is just explaining what it means to have safek kiddushin. It means either a get to get out of it, or real kiddushin to stay in it. Okay, like a second act has to be done in order to determine the status. Okay, jump down. V'hatam mishum shema shaveh pruta b'shum makom. Okay, so the reason for this is because it's maybe shaveh pruta somewhere else, and we have at least two different shitot about what's going on. Someone else wants to read? Lexi, are you in the game?
Yeah, I can read. So from
the Katav Rambam.
Okay, the Katav Rambam zal. Im kisha betavshil ubeyek v'kitz debo she'eno mitkayem im eno shave pruta be'oto makom ena mekudesh klal sharei eno magia lemakom acher ad she'yivsi ve'aved ve'lo yeh shave sham klum. This is like all. This is like all kin with Vidra. Adkan.
Adkan.
Yeah, Adkan. Essentially.
Okay.
Well, so up to there, the Rambam says like if she was mikudeshet with, or attempted to become mikudeshet with like food, essentially like cooked food or vegetables that go bad, that like are not shelf stable. If they're not worth a pruta in the place where this kiddushin is happening, then it's not even kiddushin. It's just not kiddushin whatsoever, because like you would, by the time you were able to bring them to a place where they would be worth a pruta, they would be not worth anything. But since his whole thing seems to be premised on the knowing, like it says that like whatchamacallit, the that it seemed, it's the way that he's reading it, is that like if you were certain that in another place it is worth shava pruta, you would still be at least doraita mikudeshet, implying that you would be like, yeah.
Right, so that
and then
it's kind of stepping up the game with what the Rambam is saying. It's not just this thing of a cooked dish. He's saying the only reason it's safek is because you have to go to another place to evaluate this dish to see if it's shaveh pruta. But if you already knew, even if it's less than shaveh pruta here, but it's worth more somewhere else, if you know that knowledge is enough for it to be considered shaveh pruta.
Although it is a little weird with this presentation of the Rambam of like it's either eno kiddushin klal or it's like kiddushin vadai, whereas like the one I think makes a little more sense when it comes to the steps, which is the next bit. That about, I can't hear you, Nachum. You're muted.
Yeah, I think that it makes a lot of sense though, that he's saying the suffix is just whether it is, just the way Josh said, whether it is valuable more than a pruta somewhere else. We just don't know. If we knew, then it would be vadai. Until we don't know, so it's a suffix. That's the question is, what is the suffix? And the suffix is whether it's worth a pruta somewhere else. But if we would know that, then it would be vadai for sure. Well, why not?
For me, I'm almost thinking about like as in I don't think that it's necessarily like the only way to read the Rambam that it's dafka about the yediyah. That like I think you can read it about like the fact of like there's nothing to do with this is something the Shava Pruta in a place that you would ever be with this thing. But that like if you could never be with this thing that you just like given as Kiddushin while that thing was worth Shava Pruta, like even the knowledge would potentially not be enough, or at least not be enough to be like great Kiddushin.
Right. Just there's ambiguity about how to read the Rambam. Okay, I have in my list of shitot, I have Rambam according to Rosh and Rambam according to Ran. Okay, but this is an extreme reading of the Rambam. Exactly, making it into a Doraita case if you do have the knowledge, and I think this is the Maggid Mishnah's reading of it. Just because of time, I'll say that was what was most interesting for me is this discussion in the Beit Yosef of what does safek mean. So according to the Rambam, it's almost a safek in Metziut. He reads Shema Shaveh Pruta B'Madai is so she's Mekudeshet Misafek because we don't know if she's Mekudeshet Misafek anyway, right? And according to the Ri and the Tosfot and everyone, that's not what it means. Mekudeshet Misafek is Gzera D'Rabbanan. Okay, Gzera because somewhere else this thing is worth a Shaveh Pruta, so we require this whole thing of a get anyway, but it's kind of a fence around the Torah. Can we read? Should we read? Let's read the second half of this and then jump to one last thing and finish up. Okay. So Lexi, read the Ri.
Okay. אבל רי כתב שאפילו ידוע שווה פרוטה בשום מקום, לא הווה קידושין ודאי, ולעולם הווה קידושי ספק, אפילו אינו מתקיים להוליכו למקום שווה פרוטה, וכך היא מסקנת אדוני אבי הראש. So the Ri, however, thinks that even if I know for sure that this thing I'm giving is worth at least Shava Pruta elsewhere, that would still not count as Kiddushin Vadai, but it would be Kiddushin Safek, even in a scenario where you never be able to physically bring the produce to that space where it's worth Shava Pruta. And the Rosh agrees with the Ri's presentation.
And what is the Safek?
I think, I mean, that potentially relates to the Gzera framework, and it gets into how we're kind of using these terms differently, but like.
Hey, as I said, the Beit Yosef, we don't have to read inside, but the Beit Yosef says, והדה קרא לקידושי ספק, לא משום שיהיה בו ספק מדאורייתא, אלא קידושי דרבנן הוא, ועשהו כמו ספק.
Right. That basically it's a Gzera, and so that like the thing that this Gzera has the status of like a suffix d'oraita thing.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, כמו ספק. So that's a new term for us. Okay. Can I finish?
Well, it's called a safek. In other words, he's saying you have permission to call it a safek, but really it's kind of a forcing the concept of gezerah onto the concept of safek. He's saying
you could say it's forcing, but it's also, you could say that like even if these aren't totally identical terms, that potentially the like nafkamina of them is the same. Of like,
yeah, saying the safek is not in the reasons, the safek is in the result. The result is that she is safek mekudeshet.
Well put.
But it's not, yeah.
In other words, she's in the category of safek kiddushin, which is also the same category as like kiddushin d'Rabbanan, and that's because basically we just are saying that kiddushin with less than a pruta works d'Rabbanan, and therefore, because of this idea that it might be somewhere else that is worth that. But the rabbis sort of made a rule that even if it's less, it works.
I think that. Go ahead, Lexi.
No, I was going to say that like it was like the language of like the Gzera that I think was basically they're worried that like somebody from that other place will like be there and see this, and they're like, I know that a melon is worth 2 prutas where I live. Like, guess that doesn't work. Guess it's fine. If I gave a melon to a woman where I live, like, she wouldn't be mikudeshet, and then that wouldn't be true for that person. And that was like the reason, because of basically people seeing this and having then the wrong ideas for their own places, is the reasoning behind
And
it.
so, and then that explains why it's talui zeh b'zeh. In other words, there's 2 different things going on here, which is, do you have to actually be able to bring it to the other place? In other words, once you say that it's just like you said, Lexi, then which is that we're worried that somebody might see it, let's say, then and have the wrong conception. So then we don't have to actually bring it anywhere. There's no need to bring it anywhere. And therefore, when you see the Rambam says you have to actually bring it there and be able to bring it there, you have to be able to bring it there, and if it wouldn't last until you got there, then it wouldn't work. Then from that you see that the Rambam has a totally different conception, and that his concept is that it's a real safek. And we do see it. In other words, the 2 dinim of whether it's the din d'Rabbanan or a safek d'oraita is talui in this exact question of whether you have to bring the item physically there and it has to survive. And that's why that sharp reading of the Rambam makes sense, fits to that example. Saying there's a tlut, there's a dependency between these 2 dinim. You can't, if you say it's a safek d'oraita, then you also have to say it won't work if you can't bring the food there.
Right. Well, one last, just there's some nice things in the commentaries around here. Look at the Be'er Heitev if you want a nice story. But in Pitrei Shuvah, they quote a book, Bekilat Yaakov, and he kind of explains conceptually what's going on here. והיה בספר קהילת יעקב, שכתב על זה לשונו, ונראה הטעם דהת באינון דווקא שווה פרוטה בקידושי אישה משני טעמים. There's 2 reasons that we need שווה פרוטה in the first place. א', דבאינן כסף, דאלפינן כיחה מסתעפון, בכתיב בי כסף, ופחות משווה פרוטה לא מקרה כסף. You need kesef, and like Rav Nachman said, everything has a shiur, and in order to be called kesef, it has to be worth at least a pruta. Bet, de'en isha makna nafsha b'chot mishve pruta. We had that already. The other reason is the acceptance of the woman who's receiving the kiddushin, and she would never go through with this if it's not worth a shave pruta. ולפי זה, אם שווה פרוטה במקום אחר, שפר מקודשת, כיוון ששווה פרוטה במדי, הווה כסף מדאורייתא. So, if you need these 2 conditions, if it's worth a pruta somewhere in the world, then the first condition is fulfilled. Okay? רוצה לומר del Rambam. He's adding, this is only according to the Rambam. del Rambam כן, אבל לראש, שווה פרוטה לא מקרה כסף, אלא אם כן שווה כאן. Okay, so the Rosh says, in order to be called kesef, it has to be called kesef here. It has to be שווה פרוטה where you're standing. What about the second condition? והדאישה בפחות משווה פרוטה לא מקנה נפשה, כיוון דפשטה ידה וקיבלה את הקידושין, לא שייך טעם זה. If she accepted the kiddushin, then the second condition is fulfilled. You don't need a shuvah pruta. You have this assumption, you have this chazakah that she would only accept the kiddushin if it's worth shuvah pruta. But if she accepted it for less, then that chazakah doesn't stand. And that explains kind of what the Rambam is doing here. I think that's enough for tonight.
Shkoyach.
Thank you very much, Josh. Very, very interesting. Very interesting presentation. Very interesting topic. Very conceptual topic. Thank you, everybody. I was very impressed. Everybody did a great job. And next week we'll start with Sarah, And we might not finish even next week, but hopefully we'll see. Probably not. Probably not. But we'll start with Sarah. Okay. Have a good night, everybody.